Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to walk among the Aztecs, knowing that anyone, man, woman, or child, could be taken for a ritual sacrifice at any moment? In this story, you will follow the terrifyingly vivid life of someone trapped in the heart of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. From bustling markets to the blood-stained temples, nothing is safe. Disease, political intrigue, and the constant threat of ritual death create a world where survival is almost impossible. This is not a heroic tale, it is a cautionary journey into a civilization both remarkable and merciless. You wouldn't survive a single day. Before we start our story about Aztec tribes, get into bed more comfortably, relax, you can turn on white noise in the background for more relaxation. Also, don't forget to support me with a like and a subscription. I'm always curious about where and at what time people are listening to me, write in the comments. Sweet dreams. The sun rose over the sprawling city of Tenochtitlan, casting golden light across the calm waters of Lake Texcoco. From a distance, the city appeared serene, a labyrinth of canals, stone causeways, and bustling marketplaces. But as you stepped closer, the hum of life was punctuated by something far more sinister, the occasional scream that echoed from the temples atop the Grand Pyramids. Your stomach twisted as you realized that those cries were not accidents, they were rituals. You had arrived the day before, lost and desperate, thinking you might blend in with the locals. But within hours, the true nature of Aztec society became painfully clear. Children ran alongside you, laughing and playing, unaware of the dark fate that could claim them. Merchants shouted their wares, offering vibrant feathers, maize, and obsidian tools, oblivious to the knife and the stone altar that awaited the unlucky. The streets, crowded and chaotic, were also a stage for the constant threat of violence. You caught glimpses of warriors in elaborate headdresses, their faces painted red and black, carrying obsidian-edged weapons. They moved with purpose, eyes scanning the crowd for someone, anyone, worthy of the gods' favor. In the market, you tried to buy a small loaf of maize bread, but your unfamiliar accent drew stares. Stranger, a merchant said, lowering his voice, be careful where you walk. The priests have lists, and it changes daily. You nodded, pretending to understand, but your heart raced. Lists? You wanted to ask more, but fear tightened your throat. You realized that even small mistakes, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, could mark you for the altar. As the day progressed, you followed the scent of smoke to the temples at the city's center. Massive pyramids towered over the city, their stone faces carved with jaguar and serpent motifs. Priests climbed the steps, their bare feet stained with ash and blood. At the summit, you saw the horrifying spectacle, men and women restrained, their chests open to offer their hearts to the gods. The crowd cheered, believing in the divine necessity of this sacrifice. You turned away, nauseated, unable to comprehend how anyone could cheer at another human's death. By evening, the streets transformed. Torches flickered along the canals, reflecting in the water like trembling stars. The market emptied, leaving only shadows and the occasional patrol of jaguar warriors. You found a small alley to rest, your body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Sleep felt impossible. Every distant shout, every echo of footsteps made your heart leap. You thought about the day ahead, navigating the city without drawing attention, avoiding the priests, and somehow surviving until nightfall. As you closed your eyes for a brief moment, a chilling thought struck you: no skill, no cunning, no luck could guarantee safety here. In Tenochtitlan, life was fragile. And if you misstepped, even once, the gods, or the men who served them, would not hesitate. You would not last a day. Dawn arrived again, and with it, a heavy, suffocating heat. The city had not slept, even in the early hours, you could hear the rhythmic beating of drums from the temple plazas. The sound was hypnotic and menacing at once, calling both the priests and the chosen victims to their grim duties. You tried to blend in as the city awoke, merchants setting up stalls, children running barefoot through the dust, and warriors practicing their maneuvers in open courtyards, but every glance from a stranger felt like a threat. You remembered the merchant's warning from yesterday: the priests have lists, and it changes daily. You had no idea how these lists were made. Did they take names at random? Or were certain families marked, their destinies predetermined? You dared not ask anyone. Curiosity could be fatal. Even stepping onto the main plaza carried the risk of being noticed. You kept your eyes low, pretending to sweep the ground with your gaze while your mind raced with strategies for survival. By mid-morning, the heat had grown oppressive. Sweat ran down your back as you navigated a crowded market alley. The scent of roasted maize mixed with the pungent odor of blood from the temples nearby. You overheard snippets of conversation, merchants discussing obsidian knives, women speaking in hushed tones about relatives taken yesterday, and children giggling, unaware of the terror surrounding them. The duality of life here was bewildering. Celebration and horror existed side by side. You wondered how the locals reconciled these extremes. Perhaps they had no choice, survival meant submission, and submission required silence. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near one of the temple steps. A young man had apparently angered a priest, and the crowd parted as the priest raised his ceremonial knife. You felt your stomach tighten, imagining yourself in that position, powerless and trembling. The man was dragged up the steps, screaming for mercy, while the priest's assistants held him firmly. The crowd chanted in unison, the sound like a wave crashing over your mind, and then, a flash of obsidian, bright, cold, and final. You had to look away. Heart pounding, you ducked into a narrow alley to catch your breath. Your body shook, not only from fear but also from the sheer intensity of witnessing the ritual up close. You realized that staying in the open was a death sentence. Hiding in shadows, moving quietly, and avoiding attention were the only ways to survive, even momentarily. You began to notice the subtle signs, a hand twitching toward a dagger, a priest's eyes scanning the crowd, a family huddling in fear. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could be your last. By late morning, you reached the edge of the marketplace, hoping to find water. The canals were lifelines, carrying not just fresh water but also the city's secrets. You dipped your hands into the cool liquid and drank quickly, glancing over your shoulder. You were no longer a visitor, you were prey. The realization hit you with a chilling clarity: Tenochtitlan did not forgive ignorance. Each choice, each step, could tip the balance between life and a sudden, ritualistic death. As you rested by the canal, a small boy approached you, offering a bright red fruit. He smiled, innocent, unaware of the terror around him. You hesitated. Was he a messenger of danger? Or was he simply a child? You took the fruit cautiously, nodding thanks, but your eyes never left him. Even kindness could be a trap here. Survival required constant vigilance. As noon approached, the city's heat intensified, and with it, the sense of impending doom. From the temple, the drumming grew louder, more urgent. You felt a pull, a warning that the ceremonies were about to begin again. You had learned one essential truth: in Tenochtitlan, the day was measured not by sunlight but by the rise and fall of human life on the altars. Each passing hour brought you closer to a decision: hide, flee, or risk observation. Each choice carried consequences, and there was no margin for error. You understood something profound and terrifying: there was no cleverness, no clever disguise, no charm that could guarantee safety. Here, among the Aztecs, every soul was fragile. You would not survive even a day if luck abandoned you, and luck seemed as fleeting as the wind over the lake. The sun had climbed higher, scorching the stone causeways and reflecting off the water like molten gold. The city was alive with movement, yet every movement carried danger. You learned quickly that Tenochtitlan thrived on tension. Markets hummed with trade, children chased each other along narrow streets, and birds cried overhead, but all of it existed alongside an ever-present shadow of death. The temples loomed like giant sentinels, their steps stained with the remnants of the morning sacrifices. You tried to navigate the city cautiously, keeping to the less crowded streets. Your feet ached, your throat was dry, and your mind felt stretched thin from constant vigilance. The locals eyed you curiously, whispering to one another. Any unfamiliar face could attract unwanted attention, especially a pale one like yours. You realized that camouflage was impossible, your very appearance set you apart. Every glance from a priest, every casual nod from a warrior, became a potential threat. By midday, the heat was oppressive. Sweat dripped down your face, and your stomach growled with hunger. You dared not eat too openly, showing weakness might mark you as vulnerable. Instead, you found a small shadowed alcove near a canal and nibbled on a piece of maize bread you had purchased the day before. Even in this brief respite, your ears were alert to every sound, footsteps echoing off stone, distant chants, the clatter of a dropped tool. The city's rhythm was constant, and it demanded your attention. As you rested, your thoughts drifted to the rituals. How could a society normalize such horror? The priests believed the gods demanded human hearts to ensure the sun would rise and crops would grow. To the Aztecs, the sacrifices were sacred, even necessary. To you, they were a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. The memory of the young man on the pyramid steps yesterday returned like a shadow you could not shake. The sound of chanting, the flash of the obsidian knife, the cheer of the crowd, it haunted every corner of your mind. Suddenly, movement at the far end of the alley caught your eye. A group of jaguar warriors appeared, their bodies painted in black and gold, carrying long obsidian blades. They were searching, their gaze sweeping across the crowd like hawks. Your heart raced. You pressed yourself against the wall, praying they would not notice you. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, each step a drumbeat of fear. You barely dared to breathe. The warriors passed, but the encounter left you trembling. Survival in Tenochtitlan was no longer just about avoiding priests, it was about understanding every facet of this lethal society. Every person had a role: merchants, warriors, nobles, priests, and victims. And you had none. You were an outsider, a stray in a carefully controlled ecosystem of power and ritual. Any misstep could be fatal. By mid-afternoon, the markets began to empty, and the shadows lengthened. The city's energy shifted as preparations for the next ceremony began. You caught sight of priests moving purposefully, carrying ceremonial garb and ritual implements. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, but there was a glint of excitement in their eyes. They thrived on these ceremonies, drawing power and prestige from the sacrifices. You shivered, realizing that your presence alone might attract attention if you lingered too long. You decided to move, weaving through narrow streets and alleys, seeking temporary safety. Every doorway seemed like a potential refuge, every dark corner a hiding place. Yet even in hiding, the city's pulse was relentless. From the temple steps came the low murmur of chants, punctuated by the occasional scream. You forced yourself to stay calm, to breathe quietly, to avoid drawing notice. But the tension was almost unbearable. As evening approached, a faint relief settled over the city. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows that softened the intensity of the day. Yet you knew the night brought its own dangers: secret patrols, hidden enemies, and unpredictable events. In Tenochtitlan, danger never truly disappeared, it merely shifted, like shadows moving over the water. You crouched by the canal, exhausted, your mind replaying every moment of the day. One thing was clear: you were learning, slowly, how fragile life was here, how quickly it could end, and how desperately you needed to survive. You closed your eyes briefly, hoping for rest. But even as darkness crept across the city, the distant sound of drums reminded you that the ceremonies would continue. There would always be another sacrifice, another chance for someone to be claimed. And you, an outsider, were constantly at risk. You would not survive a day without caution, cunning, and perhaps a bit of luck, but luck, you knew, was fleeting in Tenochtitlan. Night fell over Tenochtitlan, but the city did not sleep. Lanterns flickered along the canals, casting dancing shadows across the stone streets. From the temples, faint drumbeats resonated, steady and hypnotic, carrying through the alleys like an unshakable warning. You huddled in a shadowed nook, trying to appear invisible, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Even darkness offered no real safety, the city's rhythm never paused, and predators, both human and divine, continued their watch. You had learned that survival depended on observing patterns. The priests followed precise routines, moving supplies, chanting incantations, and preparing for the next sacrifices with disciplined precision. Even the warriors had predictable patrol routes, though their unpredictability lay in their sheer lethal skill. One miscalculated step, one glance in the wrong direction, and you could find yourself restrained, dragged up the temple steps, and offered to the gods. The thought made your stomach twist with dread. From your hiding place, you watched a family of merchants carrying baskets back to their homes. They moved cautiously, speaking in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders as though aware of the city's invisible eyes. You envied their familiarity, their sense of belonging. Every corner you turned, every path you took, reminded you that you were a stranger. Your unfamiliarity made you a target. The city thrived on hierarchy and ritual, and outsiders had no place. Suddenly, voices rose from a nearby plaza. You crept closer, careful to keep to the shadows, and peered around a stone pillar. A priest was instructing novices in preparation for tomorrow's ceremony. They moved swiftly, dressing in ceremonial garb, sharpening obsidian blades, and arranging sacrificial implements on the altar. The novices practiced the precise gestures, learning how to hold the victims, how to chant the prayers, how to ensure the gods were appeased. You shivered, realizing that each movement, each ritual, was a blend of devotion and death. As you observed, a small group of children wandered too close to the temple steps. Their laughter was innocent, unaware of the danger, but a stern glance from a passing priest silenced them instantly. You saw the flicker of fear in their eyes, the same fear that now consumed you. In Tenochtitlan, innocence was fragile, a fleeting illusion. One wrong word, one careless movement, could mark a person for the altar. The reality was relentless, life here was a constant negotiation with death. Your thoughts drifted to the people you had seen in the markets, the ones whose families had been taken yesterday. Their absence was noticeable, yet the city continued as if nothing had changed. Survival required detachment, a coldness that you did not possess. You were learning, painfully, that compassion and curiosity could be fatal. To endure, you would need to suppress both. A sudden noise, footsteps approaching your hiding spot, made your heart leap. You pressed yourself against the wall, holding your breath, praying the shadowed alley would conceal you. A warrior passed, his silhouette broad and imposing, and disappeared around the corner. Your pulse thundered in your ears. In this city, the line between life and death was measured in moments, and each heartbeat could be the last. As the night deepened, the drums grew louder. The city seemed alive with an almost tangible anticipation. Tomorrow would bring another day of rituals, another series of decisions that could mean survival or death. You realized that your mind was becoming hyper-aware, every sound, every movement, every glance carried significance. Fear had sharpened your senses, but it had also drained you. Sleep was a luxury, one that could be deadly if it left you vulnerable. You settled in the shadows by the canal, trying to conserve energy. The water reflected the flickering lanterns, creating an illusion of calm, but you knew better. Tenochtitlan was a city of contradictions, beauty and terror, life and death, devotion and sacrifice, all intertwined. And you, an outsider, had to navigate this dangerous tapestry with caution. Every decision mattered, every misstep could be fatal. The harsh lesson was clear: you would not survive a day here without constant vigilance, and even that might not be enough. The first light of dawn crept over Tenochtitlan, casting long, pale shadows across the stone pyramids. The city stirred slowly, the sounds of merchants and children mixing with the distant, low rumble of drums from the temple plazas. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, roasted maize, and a faint metallic tang that made your stomach churn. You knew what it was, the remnants of yesterday's sacrifices. The city carried the memory of blood like a shadow that never faded. You moved cautiously through narrow alleys, avoiding the main streets. Every face you passed seemed to carry purpose, whether a merchant, a warrior, or a servant of the temple. Each glance at you held a question: who is this stranger? Are they harmless, or are they in the wrong place at the wrong time? You realized that curiosity could kill. Observing too closely, asking too many questions, or simply standing out was dangerous. Here, anonymity was survival. By mid-morning, the temple steps were alive with activity. Priests in ornate headdresses climbed the pyramids, carrying ceremonial objects and chanting quietly to themselves. The novices followed, their faces tense with concentration. You watched from the shadows, noting the meticulous preparation. Incense burners swung carefully to fill the air with fragrant smoke, wooden staffs tapped the ground in rhythmic patterns, and obsidian knives glinted in the morning light. Each movement was precise, rehearsed, sacred, and deadly. From your vantage point, you saw a young man escorted to the top of the temple. His hands were bound, his eyes wide with fear. The crowd had already gathered below, silent in anticipation, waiting for the ritual to begin. You clenched your fists, a surge of panic and helplessness washing over you. You could do nothing but watch. In Tenochtitlan, intervention was impossible, even a thought of trying to help could seal your fate. The priest raised the obsidian knife, chanting in a language you could barely understand, the syllables slicing through the air like sharp stones. The crowd swayed, their movements synchronized, as if controlled by the pulse of the drums. The young man's struggles were brief. The knife descended swiftly, and his life ended before a heartbeat could pass. The crowd erupted in celebration, believing they had appeased the gods. You felt nausea and horror, realizing that this scene, repeated daily, was considered divine. Survival here required understanding not only the danger but the beliefs that drove it. You retreated deeper into the alleys, seeking a moment of solitude to collect your thoughts. Your legs trembled from the adrenaline, your mind spinning with fear and disbelief. How could humans accept such acts as normal? Yet here, in the heart of the Aztec Empire, it was ordinary. You saw families going about their daily routines as if nothing had happened, children laughing, merchants trading, warriors polishing their weapons. Life continued around death, seamlessly intertwined. By noon, the markets were bustling again, and the lessons of observation and caution became critical. You noted which paths the priests used, which alleys were less patrolled, and where the water was safest to drink. Every detail mattered, every distraction could be fatal. You realized that survival was not about strength or cunning alone, it required constant vigilance, an acute awareness of the environment, and a deep understanding of the city's rhythms. As the sun climbed higher, you noticed a group of women preparing offerings for the next ceremony, baskets of maize, flowers, and woven textiles. Their faces were calm, their movements practiced. You wondered if their serenity came from faith, resignation, or the sheer necessity of blending into a world ruled by fear and devotion. In Tenochtitlan, appearances mattered as much as action, being noticed could be dangerous, but standing out could be deadly. By late afternoon, the shadows grew long, and you sought refuge near a quiet canal. The city's pulse slowed slightly, but the drums from the temple reminded you that the danger never ceased. You had survived another day, but barely. Your body ached, your mind was exhausted, and yet sleep seemed impossible. Here, rest was a risk, the slightest sound could betray you. You understood the harsh truth: in Tenochtitlan, survival was fleeting. One moment of carelessness, 1 second of distraction, could end your life. You were learning, painfully, that this city did not forgive mistakes. And yet, despite the terror, you could not stop moving, observing, and learning. To survive another day, you would need cunning, luck, and an almost inhuman patience. The city was alive, merciless, and relentless. You would not survive a single day without every sense alert, every step calculated, and every instinct honed to the edge of fear. Night descended once more over Tenochtitlan, and the city transformed. Shadows deepened, stretching across the stone causeways and narrow alleys, creating pockets of concealment, but also of hidden danger. The sounds of the day faded into murmurs, punctuated by distant drumming from the temple plazas. You crouched near a canal, listening intently, your body tense, every nerve alert. Darkness did not guarantee safety, it merely changed the nature of threats. You had learned that the city's rituals were not confined to daylight. Some ceremonies required secrecy, performed in the dim glow of torches. The priests moved with deliberate stealth, carrying obsidian knives and ceremonial items, while novices whispered prayers in reverent tones. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and the faint metallic tang of blood from previous sacrifices. You swallowed hard, your stomach churning, knowing that the threat of death never truly vanished. A sudden rustle in the alley made you freeze. 2 jaguar warriors appeared, moving silently, their painted bodies blending into the shadows. You pressed yourself flat against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Their eyes scanned the darkness, weapons ready. Each step they took was deliberate, calculated. The city had taught you that vigilance was life itself, and tonight, it was more crucial than ever. The warriors passed without noticing you, and you exhaled slowly, heart pounding. One misstep, one stray glance, and you could have been claimed for the temple. As you moved deeper into the alleyways, you came across a small group of women and children huddled together. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with fear. You realized that even in darkness, survival depended on caution and observation. You avoided drawing attention, silently calculating every movement. You had begun to recognize patterns, the way people moved, the timing of patrols, and the rituals that dictated life here. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. From the distance, the drumming grew louder. You followed the sound cautiously, keeping to shadows, and saw the temple steps bathed in torchlight. A victim was being prepared for the night ceremony, restrained, terrified, and entirely at the mercy of the priests. The ritual was swift and precise. The obsidian knife flashed in the torchlight, and life ended before a heartbeat could pass. The crowd, small but devout, cheered, celebrating what they believed was a divine act. You turned away, nausea rising, realizing how normal such horror was here. Survival demanded detachment, or it demanded leaving entirely, an impossibility for now. You continued moving, seeking refuge in a narrow side street. The night air was heavy, oppressive, but slightly cooler than the scorching daytime heat. You found a small alcove and pressed yourself against the wall, trying to conserve energy. The city's pulse continued around you, distant chatter, footsteps echoing, the ever-present rhythm of the drums. Sleep was impossible, yet exhaustion gnawed at your body. In Tenochtitlan, rest was dangerous. Any moment of inattention could lead to discovery, and discovery could lead to death. The more time you spent in the city, the clearer one fact became: Tenochtitlan was merciless not because of cruelty alone, but because of devotion. Every action, every ritual, every sacrifice existed to maintain balance, according to their beliefs. The priests wielded this power with precision, the warriors enforced it without hesitation, and the citizens accepted it, whether out of fear, faith, or necessity. You, however, were an outsider, with no protection, no allegiance, and no understanding of the city's intricate social web. Every step you took was a gamble, every glance a potential mistake. By the late hours of night, the drums softened, but the tension never fully lifted. You crouched by the canal, listening to the faint lap of water against stone, letting your mind track every movement around you. The city had taught you lessons of patience, observation, and fear. Each day, and each night, was a test of survival. You understood now that even one small lapse could mean death. And yet, despite the terror, you continued. You would not survive a day easily here, but somehow, you had survived this long. And so you waited, alert, listening, preparing for another day. Another day in Tenochtitlan would demand every ounce of your wit, every shred of luck, and a heart capable of enduring horrors you had never imagined. You were learning, painfully, that the city did not forgive mistakes, and that survival was fragile, fleeting, and uncertain. In this place, life was precious because it was always so perilously close to ending. The next morning dawned with an unsettling quiet. The usual bustle of the markets was muted, as though the city itself were holding its breath. You moved cautiously through the streets, aware that today would be no ordinary day. The air was heavy with anticipation, and every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat. The drums from the temple had started early, a deep, resonant rhythm that vibrated through the stone streets, signaling that a ritual was about to begin. You avoided the main plazas, slipping into narrow alleys, your every sense alert. Even small movements drew your attention, a basket tipped slightly, revealing maize beneath, a child stumbling and quickly recovering, a priest glancing sharply in your direction. Each detail could mean the difference between safety and sudden death. You realized that survival here was not merely about hiding, it required understanding, predicting, and blending into the city's complex rhythms. By mid-morning, you found a vantage point near the temple steps. From here, you could see preparations underway for the day's ceremony. Novices moved swiftly, carrying offerings of flowers, food, and intricate decorations. Priests in feathered headdresses chanted softly, their voices rising and falling like waves. Warriors flanked the steps, their painted bodies gleaming in the sun. The entire spectacle was designed to awe, to control, and to intimidate, and you, an outsider, were caught in its midst. A sudden commotion drew your gaze, a group of officials escorted a young man through the plaza. He struggled, shouting, his eyes wide with fear. You realized immediately what awaited him. The crowd parted, murmuring but silent, giving space for the procession to reach the temple. The priest's movements were precise, each gesture, each placement of hands and offerings, followed centuries of ritual. You felt a chill as you imagined what it would be like to be in his place, powerless and exposed. The ceremony began. The young man was restrained atop the pyramid, his chest exposed to the rising sun. The priest raised the obsidian knife high, the blade catching the light. The crowd chanted in unison, a terrifying rhythm that seemed to echo in your chest. When the knife descended, life ended swiftly. The crowd cheered, celebrating what they believed was divine necessity. You turned away, nausea rising, unable to look, yet unable to leave. This city demanded observation as much as caution, to flee was to draw attention. You retreated into the alleys, heart pounding. The lessons of yesterday and the day before were etched into your mind: watch, hide, move cautiously, and never draw attention. Every inhabitant, from merchants to warriors, was attuned to the rhythms of sacrifice. You were the anomaly, the one out of place. Your survival depended on your ability to remain unseen, to understand the unspoken rules, and to predict the movements of those around you. By afternoon, the markets began to reopen, but the atmosphere was tense. Whispers traveled quickly, any unusual presence could spark suspicion. You moved among the stalls cautiously, noting the signs of fear and respect that governed daily life. Children played at a distance, and families carried on, seemingly indifferent, though you knew that each life was shadowed by the potential of sacrifice. In Tenochtitlan, the line between ordinary existence and death was razor-thin. As evening approached, you sought refuge by the canal. The water reflected the torches along the streets, creating an illusion of calm. Yet the drums still echoed faintly from the temple, a reminder that danger never truly vanished. You understood more clearly now the nature of this city: it was both magnificent and merciless. Survival required vigilance, cunning, and perhaps a touch of luck. Every day was a test, every shadow a potential threat, and every decision a choice between life and death. You settled in the darkness, exhausted but alert. Another day had passed, and you had survived, barely. The lessons were stark: Tenochtitlan was a city of ritual and power, devotion and terror, and you were an outsider navigating its deadly currents. To endure, you would need every skill, every ounce of patience, and a constant awareness that in this city, no one was safe. You would not survive a day without these lessons, and even with them, survival was never guaranteed. Dawn broke with a muted glow over Tenochtitlan, the city cloaked in a haze of incense smoke and the lingering scent of blood from yesterday's sacrifices. The canals reflected the pale light, rippling as small boats slid silently along their courses. You moved cautiously along the stone pathways, knowing that today, like every day, survival would demand every ounce of attention you could muster. The city felt alive with anticipation, as if it too sensed the looming rituals that dictated its rhythms. You had begun to notice patterns, the way the priests moved, the timing of their chants, the predictable routes of the jaguar warriors, but these insights offered no guarantees. One error could be fatal. A misstep, a stumble, a poorly timed glance could place you in the wrong path at the wrong moment. The knowledge weighed heavily on you. Tenochtitlan was not a city that forgave mistakes, it rewarded the attentive and punished the oblivious. By mid-morning, you reached the edge of the marketplace. Merchants were setting up their stalls, calling out in melodic, yet urgent voices. Freshly roasted maize, bright feathers, woven textiles, and obsidian tools filled the air with color and movement. Yet beneath this veneer of normality, the undercurrent of danger was palpable. You saw parents whispering warnings to their children, workers glancing anxiously toward the temples, and guards subtly adjusting their positions. Life here continued in a delicate dance, with survival hinging on both awareness and discretion. From your vantage point, you spotted a small group of temple officials carrying offerings toward the main pyramid. Their movements were swift and methodical, rehearsed through years of repetition. You realized that every citizen in this city played a role in sustaining the rituals, whether willingly or through necessity. You, however, had no role, no protection, and no understanding beyond observation. Your existence was precarious, balanced on the edge of notice and oblivion. A sudden shout drew your attention. A child had wandered too close to the temple steps, laughing and unaware of the danger. A priest noticed immediately, his hand tightening around the obsidian knife at his waist. The child froze, eyes wide, the laughter cut off abruptly. You pressed yourself against a nearby wall, heart hammering. One misstep, one moment of carelessness like that, and you, or someone you observed, could be claimed for the rituals. The priest motioned to a novice, and together they guided the child away, leaving only a lingering sense of tension. By noon, the sun had climbed high, beating down on the stone streets and the pyramids. The heat was oppressive, and your body ached from constant vigilance. You ducked into an alley for shade, taking a brief moment to rest while remaining alert. You observed the patterns again, the timing of patrols, the movement of merchants, and the subtle cues that revealed who was under the watchful eye of the priests. Survival was not about strength or speed alone, it was about reading the city, anticipating danger, and avoiding notice. From your hiding spot, you noticed a ritual in preparation. A young man had been selected, restrained, and brought to the base of the pyramid. Priests moved around him, checking ceremonial garb, adjusting headdresses, and chanting softly. You could see the fear in the young man's eyes, the realization that he was powerless, that his fate was sealed. The crowd, already gathering, whispered in anticipation. You felt a wave of nausea, yet you could not look away. Observation was necessary, it was your only tool to understand how to survive. As afternoon approached, the city continued its intricate dance of life and death. Children played at a distance, merchants hawked their wares, and families went about daily tasks, all under the shadow of ritual. You understood now that fear was not only for the victims, it was woven into the lives of everyone who lived here. Even a moment of inattention could be deadly. And yet, despite the horror, the beauty of the city's architecture, the vivid colors of textiles, and the shimmering water of the canals created a surreal, almost hypnotic contrast. By evening, the drums from the temple began again, echoing through the streets. You found a narrow alley to hide in, crouched against the wall, and reflected on the day. Each hour had tested your senses, each moment had demanded vigilance, and each breath had been measured against the possibility of sudden death. You had survived, but barely. You knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and the same relentless tension. Life in Tenochtitlan was a constant negotiation with death. You would not survive a day here without cunning, patience, and the rarest of luck. The next morning arrived with the same oppressive heat, the sun rising over Tenochtitlan's canals and stone causeways like a relentless sentinel. You moved cautiously, knowing that even small mistakes could prove fatal. Yesterday's lessons were etched deeply in your mind: observe, predict, hide, and never, ever draw attention. Every shadow, every movement, every glance held significance. In this city, the line between life and death was razor thin, and it was your constant focus to remain unnoticed. By mid-morning, the market was in full swing, a chaotic symphony of colors, voices, and movement. Merchants shouted their wares, children darted between stalls, and jaguar warriors patrolled discreetly, keeping watch over the crowd. You realized that survival depended on understanding not only the explicit dangers but also the subtle social cues. How people spoke, moved, or glanced could reveal the presence of priests or warriors nearby. Every observation was a potential lifesaver. As you maneuvered through the narrow streets, you noticed a small gathering near a temple side entrance. A ritual was in preparation, not yet public. A young woman was being escorted by two priests, her hands bound and her eyes wide with terror. The crowd was minimal, but the intensity of the ceremony made it no less deadly. You pressed yourself against the wall, trying to remain unseen, your pulse racing. This was the heart of Tenochtitlan's power: rituals performed in plain sight, blending devotion, spectacle, and mortal fear. The priests moved with practiced precision, their chants low and hypnotic. Novices held ceremonial tools, ready to assist. You noted every detail: the placement of hands, the timing of movements, the positioning of the victim. Knowledge like this was vital. Understanding the patterns increased your chances of survival. Yet even with observation, fear clamped tightly around your chest. Any misstep, any inadvertent glance, could draw the attention of the priests. By noon, the city's rhythm shifted. The markets thinned, and the streets quieted just enough for you to move more freely. You ducked into an alley, panting, your body exhausted from constant vigilance. You had begun to internalize the lessons of the past days. Tenochtitlan demanded a delicate balance of patience, observation, and silence. Even a whisper or a wrong gesture could be fatal. You reflected on the young woman you had seen, her life dependent on the meticulous motions of those around her. The thought of what awaited those unprepared chilled you to the bone. As the afternoon heat intensified, you moved along the canals, noting the precise ways locals avoided the watchful eyes of priests and warriors. Families carried out daily routines, children played cautiously, and merchants adjusted their positions based on the flow of traffic and the timing of patrols. You realized that every person in the city had internalized survival as instinct. You, however, remained an outsider, constantly calculating, constantly fearful, never fully at ease. The distant drums signaled the approach of the evening ritual. You found a small hiding place behind a stack of crates near the market, crouched low, and observed. A young boy, perhaps no older than 10, was escorted toward the temple. His eyes were wide, his limbs trembling. The priests moved with ritualistic precision, preparing him for the sacrifice. You felt your stomach churn, the horror of the city pressing down on you. The crowd below, quiet but attentive, seemed to exist in a parallel reality where death and devotion were intertwined. As night fell, the city's pulse remained relentless. Torches flickered along the canals, casting long shadows over the stone streets. The drums softened but never ceased entirely. You had survived another day, but barely. Every lesson you had learned, the timing of movements, the patterns of patrols, the rituals themselves, was now part of your consciousness. You understood that survival here was not about bravery or strength, it was about patience, observation, and an unrelenting awareness of danger. You pressed yourself against the cool stone of the alley, exhausted and weary. Another day had passed, and you had lived to see it. But the lessons were harsh. In Tenochtitlan, even the most careful observer could be claimed in an instant. Life was fragile, fleeting, and constantly measured against the altar. You would not survive a single day without vigilance, cunning, and perhaps a stroke of luck that this city rarely offered to outsiders. The dawn of the 10th day brought an uneasy calm. The sun rose pale and shimmering over Tenochtitlan, glinting off the canals and the polished stone of the city's causeways. The air was thick with heat and the faint odor of incense, carrying a whisper of fear from yesterday's ceremonies. You moved cautiously, understanding that today's challenges could be more immediate than ever. The city seemed to hum with anticipation, as if aware that a new trial awaited. You kept to the shadowed streets, noting every detail, the position of warriors, the gestures of merchants, the subtle movements of the priests. Survival demanded attention to patterns, a constant mental map of potential threats. Even a single lapse, a stumble, a poorly timed glance, or an accidental brush against a passerby, could draw deadly attention. You realized now that the city was a living entity, one that could punish in a heartbeat and reward those who understood its hidden rhythms. By mid-morning, the temples were already bustling. Priests in feathered headdresses moved with deliberate precision, arranging ceremonial objects and chanting softly. Novices practiced the exact movements they would perform in moments, learning how to restrain, how to chant, how to make the ritual flawless. You observed from the shadows, heart pounding, stomach twisting with fear. The knowledge that one misstep could place you on the altar made every breath feel dangerous. From your vantage point, you saw a young man being brought forward, restrained by two priests. His eyes were wide with terror, scanning the crowd as if searching for an escape. There was none. The crowd, devout and silent, watched with anticipation. You could almost feel their collective focus pressing down, a force of belief that transformed horror into ceremony. You pressed yourself lower against the wall, willing yourself to vanish into the shadows. The priest raised the obsidian knife, its edge gleaming under the rising sun. The rhythm of the drums quickened, echoing through the plazas, through the canals, through your chest. The young man's struggle was brief. The knife descended swiftly, cutting through life like a shadow of inevitability. The crowd erupted into celebration, chanting praises to the gods. You turned away, your stomach twisting, your heart racing. Every witness here was expected to learn, to accept, to continue the cycle. For an outsider, the lesson was stark: Tenochtitlan did not forgive ignorance or hesitation. You retreated into the alleys, muscles trembling from adrenaline. The market was still bustling, children darted between stalls, and merchants continued their trade, as if nothing had happened. The juxtaposition of daily life and ritual slaughter was surreal, a constant reminder of the fragile line between existence and death. You understood that your survival depended not just on hiding but on observing, learning, and adapting to the city's rhythms. By afternoon, the sun had climbed high, baking the stone streets and causeways. You moved cautiously through the alleys, noting the positioning of guards and the flow of citizens. Even the smallest detail, a glance, a gesture, the timing of a chant, could be life-saving. You began to recognize subtle signs of danger, a slight tension in a merchant's posture, a child clutching a parent's hand, a warrior shifting position unexpectedly. Each clue was a thread in the delicate web of survival. As evening approached, you found a narrow alcove by the canal to rest, pressing yourself against the cool stone. The city's pulse continued, torches flickered, drums echoed faintly, and distant chants carried through the night air. Another day had passed, and you had survived, but barely. You had begun to understand the brutal lesson Tenochtitlan demanded: life here was a fragile, fleeting gift, always measured against the altar, the knife, and the ever-watchful eyes of the priests. You closed your eyes briefly, though sleep was impossible. Tomorrow, the lessons would continue, and the city would demand more of your awareness, cunning, and nerve. In Tenochtitlan, survival was never guaranteed. One misstep could erase you in an instant. And yet, despite the terror, you were learning, painfully, relentlessly, what it meant to navigate a civilization where life was precious because it was always so perilously close to ending. The 11th dawn arrived with a gray, hazy light filtering through the city's towering pyramids. The air was thick and humid, carrying the faint, metallic scent of blood from previous ceremonies. You moved cautiously, each step measured, every glance intentional. Tenochtitlan's rhythm had become a constant in your mind, the distant drums, the chanting, the careful steps of the jaguar warriors, the swift, purposeful motions of priests. Survival depended on blending into this rhythm, predicting it, and never breaking its flow. By mid-morning, the marketplace was alive, but tension thrummed beneath the surface. Merchants called out their wares, children darted between stalls, and women carried baskets of flowers and food for offerings. Yet beneath this mundane activity was a subtle current of fear, visible in the smallest gestures. Parents whispered to their children, and workers shifted slightly when priests or warriors approached. You realized that every citizen had internalized survival as instinct. For you, it was a learned art, a constant calculation of risk. You had begun to understand subtle signs that indicated imminent danger. A slight hand movement, a change in the tone of a chant, a whispered command, each could mean the difference between safety and death. It was knowledge born from observation, but even understanding these patterns did not eliminate the risk. Today, the danger would feel closer than ever. By noon, near the temple steps, you noticed a young woman being guided forward. Her hands were bound, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. You froze, realizing how quickly someone could be claimed. The priests moved with an almost mechanical precision, preparing her for the ritual. Novices assisted, adjusting ceremonial clothing and holding implements ready for use. You pressed yourself against a stone wall, heart pounding, stomach churning with a mix of fear and helplessness. You could do nothing. You could only watch. Suddenly, a warrior's gaze swept over the plaza in your direction. You flattened yourself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. The jaguar warrior paused, eyes scanning, muscles tensed, before moving on. Your chest heaved with relief, but the encounter reinforced the truth: in Tenochtitlan, every step, every gesture, and every second could determine whether you lived or died. There was no margin for error. As afternoon approached, the city's heat became almost unbearable. You moved along the canals, seeking a narrow alley for shade. The water shimmered, reflecting torchlight and sunlight in an almost hypnotic pattern, but the beauty did little to ease your tension. You noted the positioning of merchants, guards, and passers-by. You had to remain constantly aware, constantly calculating, constantly predicting. The city's rhythm dictated life and death, and you were an outsider learning to navigate it. From your vantage point, you observed the ritual unfold. The young woman, now atop the pyramid, faced the obsidian knife. The priests chanted in low, mesmerizing tones, and the crowd below watched silently, absorbed in the ceremony. The knife descended swiftly, cutting through life in a single, brutal moment. The crowd erupted, believing they had appeased the gods. You turned away, unable to watch, stomach twisting, realizing that this spectacle repeated daily, that horror and devotion were inseparable here. By evening, the drums softened, but the city's pulse never ceased. Torches flickered along the canals, casting long shadows. You found refuge in a small alcove, pressed against cool stone, exhausted and tense. Each day tested your senses, each moment demanded vigilance. You had survived another day, but the realization was clear: Tenochtitlan did not forgive mistakes. Life was fragile, fleeting, and always measured against the altar. You would not survive a single day without constant awareness, cunning, and perhaps a fragment of luck that this city rarely extended to outsiders. The 12th morning arrived with a blinding sun, reflecting off the canals and stone pyramids, making the city seem even more oppressive than before. You moved cautiously, aware that today, the danger might come closer than ever. Every step in Tenochtitlan was a potential misstep, every glance a possible threat. You had learned to read the city like a map, noting patterns in movement, timing, and behavior, but even this knowledge could not guarantee safety. By mid-morning, the markets were bustling as usual. Merchants hawked brightly colored textiles, baskets of maize, and exotic herbs. Children darted between the stalls, laughing, their innocence a stark contrast to the ever-present threat of the temples. Yet beneath the surface, tension was palpable. You noticed subtle cues: the way a merchant's eyes flicked toward the temple, the tightening grip of a parent's hand, the disciplined posture of a passing warrior. Survival here was a constant exercise in observation and prediction. Suddenly, a priest's gaze locked onto you, sharp and unyielding. For a brief, terrifying moment, your heart seemed to stop. He was scanning the crowd, but whether he was seeking victims, novices, or simply observing the marketplace, you could not tell. You pressed yourself flat against a wall, hoping the shadows concealed you. The priest moved on, and you exhaled slowly, realizing just how exposed you truly were. One misstep, one glance, 1 second too long, could seal your fate. By noon, the temples were alive with activity. A young man was being led toward the pyramid steps, his hands bound, eyes wide with fear. Novices prepared ceremonial implements, adjusting the young man's clothing and chanting softly. The priests moved with calculated precision, their motions rehearsed and exact. You pressed yourself against a distant wall, watching every gesture, every movement. Knowledge of these patterns was your lifeline, your only defense against becoming part of the ritual yourself. The obsidian knife gleamed in the midday sun. The young man's struggle was brief, a final, futile attempt at resistance. The knife descended with swift inevitability, and the crowd erupted in praise for the gods. You turned away, stomach churning, realizing that life and death were intertwined in Tenochtitlan in ways you had never imagined. Survival required constant vigilance, mental discipline, and an acute awareness of every detail around you. As afternoon heat bore down, you sought refuge along the canals, observing the subtle rhythms of city life. Merchants repositioned their stalls based on the flow of people and the patrols of warriors. Children played cautiously, aware of the invisible rules that governed every step. Families moved with careful precision, their lives a blend of devotion, fear, and routine. You understood that every inhabitant had internalized survival as instinct, while you relied on observation and constant calculation. By evening, the drums from the temple became louder, signaling the approach of the next ceremony. Torches flickered along the canals, casting long, eerie shadows. You crouched in a narrow alley, muscles tense, senses sharpened. The city had begun to feel like a living predator, each heartbeat a reminder that you were constantly under scrutiny. Even as the sun set, the lessons of Tenochtitlan were clear: life was fragile, fleeting, and measured against the altar. You would not survive a single day without vigilance, cunning, and a rare touch of luck. As night fell completely, you pressed yourself against the cool stone of the canal, listening to distant chants and the soft lap of water. Each day was a relentless test of awareness and nerve. You had survived another day, but the city's lesson remained unyielding. In Tenochtitlan, even the smallest error could be fatal, and life was never guaranteed. The knowledge weighed heavily, but it was now part of you. Survival was all that mattered, and every instinct, every observation, every calculated move was a shield against the ever-present knife. The 13th morning broke with a pale, scorching light, bouncing off the stone pyramids and the shimmering canals of Tenochtitlan. You moved cautiously, heart racing, fully aware that today, the danger might reach out and touch you personally. Every corner, every shadow, every passerby could conceal a threat. The city had taught you that survival was not merely about hiding, but about anticipating every possible movement and consequence. By mid-morning, the marketplace hummed with activity, but you noticed subtle differences in the crowd. Merchants' eyes darted more frequently toward the temple, children clung slightly closer to their parents, and warriors' postures were taut, ready for sudden motion. You realized that a major ceremony must be approaching. The air carried a tense energy, a pulse that seemed to radiate from the pyramid itself. Your pulse quickened in response, nerves on edge. Suddenly, a group of jaguar warriors turned sharply in your direction. Your stomach dropped. Their painted bodies, sleek and lethal, moved with a predator's precision. You froze, pressing yourself flat against the stone wall, hiding in plain sight. One of the warriors' eyes scanned your direction with alarming focus. You barely dared to breathe, counting seconds in your head, willing the shadows to conceal you. Slowly, deliberately, they moved on, leaving your heart hammering and your body trembling. One glance could have meant the end. By noon, the temple steps were alive with motion. Novices and priests arranged ceremonial garb, tools, and offerings, preparing for the day's sacrifice. From your vantage point, you saw a young woman guided to the top of the pyramid. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she struggled slightly, bound and powerless. The priests moved with practiced precision, chanting in a low, hypnotic rhythm. Every motion, every gesture, every step was carefully calculated. You pressed yourself closer to the wall, stomach twisting in horror, realizing that knowledge was your only defense. The obsidian knife glimmered in the sun. The ritual began, swift and merciless. Life ended in moments, replaced instantly by the crowd's cheers and chants. You turned away, swallowing bile, fighting the urge to flee, understanding that running could draw attention, and death. Observation, blending, timing, and patience were the only tools you had. The city's rules were harsh and unyielding, the slightest mistake, and you could join the fallen. By afternoon, the city seemed to pulsate with a rhythm you were beginning to internalize. Merchants shifted their positions, subtly avoiding the patrols of warriors. Children ran in patterns that minimized exposure. Families moved carefully, aware that every gesture could signal safety or danger. You began to recognize these patterns as essential to survival, mapping them in your mind, using them as a guide for movement. Yet, the sense of being noticed lingered, a whisper in the back of your consciousness that you were not entirely invisible. The sun began its descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the streets. Drums from the temple signaled preparations for the evening ceremony. You crouched in a narrow alley, muscles tense, senses sharpened, aware that tonight the threat could reach even closer. The city's pulse felt like it had focused on you. Every sound, the distant chant, a footstep, a whispered command, was magnified in your mind. You had survived another day, but barely. Night fell, the streets flickering with torchlight. You pressed yourself against the cool stone by the canal, listening to the soft lap of water and the fading drums. Each day, the city had taught you more. Life was a fragile, fleeting thing, measured against ritual and the ever-present threat of death. The lessons were harsh, but clear. To survive another day, you needed constant awareness, precise observation, and a mind sharpened by fear. Tenochtitlan would not forgive mistakes. You were learning that each day might be your last, and yet, somehow, you were still alive. The 14th morning arrived hot and blinding, the sun casting harsh light across Tenochtitlan's stone streets and shimmering canals. You moved cautiously, aware that today's dangers might touch you directly. Each shadow seemed to shift with hidden intent, every passerby potentially a threat. You had become hyper-aware of the city's rhythms, but even this vigilance could not erase the feeling that eyes were on you, judging your every move. By mid-morning, the marketplace buzzed with activity, but tension underlay the bustle. Merchants hawked their wares more urgently, glancing toward the temple. Children stayed close to parents, whispering and stepping carefully around the jaguar warriors patrolling the square. The city had become a living maze of rules and danger, and your survival depended on navigating its invisible currents. Every gesture and glance required calculation, every movement could be observed and judged. Suddenly, a young priest turned sharply in your direction, his eyes narrowing. You froze, pressed flat against the stone wall. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. The priest's gaze lingered, scanning the crowd, muscles tensed as if sensing something amiss. Your heart pounded. One mistake here could be fatal. Slowly, the priest moved on, and your muscles relaxed slightly, though the adrenaline still coursed through you. You realized that even fleeting exposure could have deadly consequences. By noon, near the temple steps, a group of novices prepared the day's sacrifice. A young boy, trembling and bound, was led to the top of the pyramid. The priests moved with meticulous precision, arranging ceremonial implements, adjusting ceremonial garb, and chanting in low, hypnotic tones. You crouched behind a stone pillar, stomach twisting with nausea. Knowledge was your shield, observation was your lifeline. You knew that understanding the ritual steps, the movement of the priests, and the crowd's reactions could mean the difference between survival and death. The obsidian knife flashed in the sunlight. The boy's struggle was brief. The knife descended swiftly, life ending in a heartbeat. The crowd erupted into chants and cheers, celebrating what they believed was divine necessity. You turned away, overwhelmed, yet aware that fleeing might attract attention and seal your own fate. Survival in Tenochtitlan was not about bravery, it was about patience, calculation, and blending into the city's relentless rhythm. As afternoon pressed on, you navigated the alleys along the canals, noting subtle shifts in the behavior of the citizens. Merchants adjusted their stalls to avoid the gaze of patrolling warriors. Children played cautiously, aware of invisible rules. Families moved deliberately, observing patterns to remain safe. You realized that everyone had internalized the rhythm of fear and ritual, while you relied on acute observation and calculated movement. Even the slightest error, a wrong glance, a misstep, a pause too long, could draw lethal attention. By late afternoon, the drums from the temple began their low, ominous thrum. Torches flickered along the streets, casting shadows that seemed to move like living things. You crouched in a narrow alcove by the canal, every muscle tensed. Tonight, the danger felt closer than ever, almost personal. The city's pulse seemed to focus on you, a silent predator testing your reactions. Another day survived, yes, but barely. Night fell fully, the air thick with incense, smoke, and the lingering metallic tang of blood. You pressed against the cool stone, listening to distant chants and the soft lap of water, your mind exhausted but alert. Tenochtitlan had taught you the harshest lesson yet: life was fleeting, fragile, and constantly measured against the altar. Each day demanded vigilance, cunning, and nerve sharpened by fear. Even with all your learning, you knew survival was never guaranteed. One misstep could erase you in an instant, and yet, somehow, you were still alive. The 15th morning arrived with a thick haze settling over Tenochtitlan, muting the bright colors of the city but not its dangers. You moved cautiously, alert to every movement, every sound. The sun's glare reflected off the polished stone streets, creating shifting patterns that could conceal both predators and prey. Today, you felt the city itself pressing against you, as if it knew you were an outsider, fragile and exposed. By mid-morning, the market was alive with activity, but attention thrummed beneath the noise. Merchants adjusted the placement of their baskets, subtly signaling each other when warriors approached. Children stayed close to parents, whispering and moving with deliberate caution. Even the city's stray animals seemed alert, skittish in ways that mirrored the unease of the people. You realized that survival depended not only on avoiding detection by the priests and warriors but also on reading the hidden signals of everyone around you. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior emerged from a side street, his painted body blending with the shadows. He scanned the crowd, his eyes sharp and predatory. You pressed yourself against a wall, heart hammering. One false movement, one inadvertent glance, could be fatal. The warrior's gaze lingered unnervingly close to where you crouched. You held your breath, muscles trembling with fear, until finally he moved on. The relief was fleeting. You knew the city had reminded you of its omnipresence, its constant watchfulness. By noon, the temple steps were once again alive with preparation for the day's ritual. A young girl was brought forward, her hands bound and her eyes wide with terror. Priests and novices moved with precise, rehearsed motions, adjusting ceremonial garb, arranging offerings, and chanting in low, hypnotic tones. You crouched in the shadows, stomach twisting, knowing that knowledge of these movements was your only protection. Observation was survival. You could do nothing else. The obsidian knife gleamed in the bright sunlight. The ritual began, swift and inexorable. Life ended in moments, replaced instantly by the crowd's chants and cheers. You turned away, nauseated but alert. Fleeing could draw attention, watching too closely could as well. The lesson was clear: Tenochtitlan demanded constant awareness, mental discipline, and a precise understanding of its deadly rhythms. Survival here was not about courage, but about careful calculation and the ability to remain invisible. As the afternoon heat pressed down, you moved cautiously along the canals. Merchants repositioned their stalls, avoiding the gaze of patrolling warriors. Children played carefully, aware of invisible rules. Families moved deliberately, performing rituals of safety born from generations of practice. You began to recognize these patterns as a map to survival, but the slightest lapse could make you prey. Every glance, every step, every breath mattered. By late afternoon, the drums from the temple grew louder, resonating through the streets and alleys. Torches flickered in the approaching twilight, casting long, sinister shadows. You crouched in a narrow alley, muscles tense, senses sharpened, aware that the danger felt almost personal tonight. The city's pulse seemed focused on you, and you understood that you had to navigate with even greater care. Another day had passed, but survival was fragile, and the knowledge that you were an outsider sharpened the stakes. Night fell completely, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted and alert. The city's rhythm continued unabated, chants, footsteps, water lapping against the walls, and the faint metallic scent of blood lingering in the air. You had survived another day, but Tenochtitlan had made its lesson clear: life was precarious, fleeting, and always measured against the altar. Each decision, each movement, each second of observation was vital. One mistake could erase you instantly, and yet, somehow, you were still alive. The 16th morning dawned hot and heavy, the sun climbing over Tenochtitlan like a relentless sentinel. The canals gleamed with reflected light, but even the beauty of the water did little to ease the oppressive tension that had become your constant companion. Every step felt perilous. Every shadow, every movement, every glance could conceal mortal danger. You had survived 15 days, but each new dawn reminded you that survival here was fragile and temporary. By mid-morning, the marketplace buzzed with activity. Merchants arranged baskets of maize, colorful textiles, and feathers for offerings. Children wove between the stalls, and women carried baskets to the temples. Yet beneath the ordinary bustle lay a pulse of fear and caution. Parents whispered warnings, glancing nervously toward the temple steps. Warriors patrolled discreetly but with lethal precision. Every inhabitant moved in careful synchrony with the city's rhythms. You, an outsider, had to navigate this delicate dance without error. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's eyes swept past your hiding spot. Your stomach tightened. You pressed yourself flat against the wall, barely daring to breathe. For a terrifying moment, his gaze lingered, and your mind raced through every possible escape. One misstep, one accidental glance, could have been fatal. Slowly, deliberately, he moved on. You exhaled, the adrenaline still coursing through your veins. The encounter reminded you that survival depended not on strength or speed, but on blending, on observation, and on the precise timing of every action. By noon, near the temple steps, a young man was led forward for the ritual. Bound, trembling, he seemed barely able to comprehend his fate. Priests and novices moved with practiced precision, adjusting ceremonial garb, arranging offerings, and chanting low, hypnotic prayers. You watched from a shadowed alley, stomach churning. Observation had become a lifeline. Every detail mattered: the timing of each movement, the placement of hands, the rhythm of the chants. Misreading any of these could put you directly in danger. The obsidian knife gleamed sharply in the sun. The ritual began, swift and merciless. Life ended before the boy could fully struggle, replaced immediately by the crowd's chants and shouts of praise. You turned away, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm you. Fleeing could draw attention, watching too closely could do the same. Tenochtitlan's rules were unforgiving, leaving no margin for hesitation. Survival required constant vigilance, mental discipline, and acute awareness of every motion and sound. As the afternoon heat pressed down, you moved cautiously along the canal paths, noting the subtleties of the crowd. Merchants shifted their stalls, avoiding the gaze of patrolling warriors. Children played cautiously, learning the city's hidden rules. Families moved deliberately, their gestures, postures, and steps part of a learned choreography of survival. You mapped these patterns in your mind, using them to navigate the dangerous streets. Even with all this care, the threat of discovery was never far. By late afternoon, the drums from the temple grew louder, reverberating through the streets. Torches flickered in the approaching twilight, stretching long, ominous shadows across stone and water. You crouched in a narrow alley, tense, alert, aware that the city's danger was now almost personal. Every heartbeat seemed magnified, every sound sharpened. Survival was a fragile thread you clung to, a thread constantly tested by the city's omnipresent eyes. Night fell, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone of the canal, exhausted yet unable to relax. The distant chants and soft lap of water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were relentless. Life was fragile, fleeting, and measured against the altar, the knife, and the ritual. Each day demanded awareness, cunning, and nerve sharpened by fear. One misstep could erase you in an instant. And yet, despite the terror, you had survived 16 days, barely, but undeniably. The 18th morning broke with a fierce heat that seemed to set Tenochtitlan ablaze. Sunlight reflected off the stone streets and pyramids, intensifying the city's oppressive aura. You moved cautiously, every step deliberate, every glance scanning for danger. The city's pulse felt almost personal now, a reminder that your presence as an outsider made you vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to shift with intent, hiding potential threats that could strike without warning. By mid-morning, the marketplace was alive with the usual bustle. Merchants shouted their wares, bright feathers, baskets of maize, woven textiles, while children darted carefully between stalls. Yet beneath the chaos, a tension hummed. Parents whispered warnings to their children, warriors moved with subtle shifts of posture, and priests monitored the streets with hawk-like precision. The city was alive with invisible signals, and you had learned to read them, though the slightest misinterpretation could cost you your life. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's gaze fell directly on you. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. You pressed yourself flat against the wall, heart hammering, muscles tensed. The warrior's eyes scanned deliberately, searching, testing, measuring. Every instinct screamed that one misstep, one shiver, one accidental movement, could be fatal. Slowly, the warrior moved on, but the encounter left a gnawing awareness. Today, Tenochtitlan was watching you more closely than ever. By noon, the temple steps were alive with activity. Priests and novices moved with perfect synchronicity, preparing a young man for the ritual. He trembled as they adjusted his ceremonial garb and arranged offerings. Low chants filled the air, a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to bind the city together. You crouched in the shadows, stomach tight with fear. Observation was survival. Every movement, every gesture, every subtle rhythm could be the difference between life and death. Knowledge alone kept you alive. The obsidian knife flashed in the sun. The ritual began with swift precision. The young man's life ended before he could fully resist. The crowd erupted in celebration, chanting praises to the gods. You turned away, nausea rising, aware that fleeing could draw attention and death. Survival in Tenochtitlan required patience, calculation, and complete invisibility. One false move could erase you in an instant. As afternoon pressed on, you moved cautiously along the canals, noting every subtle detail of the crowd's behavior. Merchants shifted their stalls, avoiding the gaze of patrolling warriors. Children played in patterns that avoided danger, and families performed their daily routines with deliberate caution. You began internalizing these behaviors, copying them where possible, yet the ever-present risk remained. Even one accidental glance toward a priest could bring sudden death. By late afternoon, the distant drumming from the temple signaled the approach of the evening ceremony. Torches flickered along the streets, casting long shadows that seemed alive. You crouched in a narrow alley, muscles tense, senses alert. The city's danger felt immediate, personal, and inescapable. Every heartbeat, every movement, every glance could be a test of your vigilance. Survival was a thin thread you clung to, fraying with each passing second. Night fell, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone of the canal, exhausted yet alert. The drums and chants continued in the distance, a reminder that Tenochtitlan's lessons were merciless. Life here was fragile, fleeting, and always measured against the altar, the knife, and the ritual. Each second, each decision, each movement could decide whether you lived or were claimed. And yet, despite the omnipresent danger, you had survived 18 days, an extraordinary testament to your awareness, cunning, and nerve. The 19th morning dawned with a relentless heat, the sun glaring off Tenochtitlan's polished stone streets and canals. You moved with extreme caution, every step measured, every glance scanned for hidden threats. The city had begun to feel almost alive, aware of your presence, its rhythms pulsing like a predator circling its prey. Each shadow seemed to twitch with potential danger, each passerby a possible source of death. By mid-morning, the marketplace was bustling. Merchants displayed vibrant textiles, baskets of maize, and colorful feathers, calling out to attract buyers. Children weaved between stalls, careful to stay near their parents. Yet beneath the daily bustle, a subtle tension vibrated through the crowd. Parents whispered urgently, workers adjusted positions to avoid watchful eyes, and jaguar warriors shifted their stance as they patrolled. The city was a complex network of signals, all of them deadly if misread. You had learned to interpret them, but the risk remained. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's gaze fixed on you. Panic surged through your body. You flattened against the nearest wall, muscles tense, heart hammering. One wrong move, one accidental glance, could end your life instantly. The warrior scanned methodically, assessing the crowd, lingering on your hiding place for agonizing seconds. Slowly, almost tortuously, he moved on. Relief washed over you, yet the encounter left a lingering sense of being marked. You realized the danger today was more personal than ever. By noon, the temple steps were alive with preparations. Priests adjusted ceremonial garb, arranged offerings, and chanted softly. A young girl, bound and trembling, was guided toward the pyramid summit. Every movement of the priests was precise, deliberate, and rehearsed. You crouched in the shadows, stomach twisting, knowing that the slightest miscalculation on your part could be fatal. Observation was survival. Your knowledge of patterns and timings was your only shield against being noticed. The obsidian knife caught the sunlight. The ritual began with terrifying speed. The young girl's struggle was brief, life was extinguished in moments. The crowd erupted in chants of praise to the gods. You turned away, nausea threatening to overtake you. Fleeing could draw attention, watching too closely could be equally deadly. Survival in Tenochtitlan depended on blending perfectly, anticipating threats, and remaining invisible. One mistake could erase you instantly. As the afternoon heat pressed down, you navigated the canals, carefully observing the crowd. Merchants subtly shifted their stalls to avoid the gaze of patrolling warriors. Children moved with cautious precision. Families performed their routines with deliberate care, each gesture honed over generations to survive in a city where death could arrive without warning. You copied their patterns as best as you could, but the sense of imminent danger never left you. By late afternoon, the drumming from the temple grew louder, signaling the approach of the evening ritual. Torches flickered along the streets, casting shifting shadows that seemed to twist and reach toward you. You crouched in a narrow alley, every muscle coiled, every sense heightened. The city's danger felt close, almost tangible, and you knew that survival depended on your continued vigilance. Every heartbeat, every movement, every glance was a test. Night fell, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted yet alert. The distant chants and soft lapping of water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were relentless. Life was fragile, fleeting, and constantly measured against the altar, the knife, and the rituals. Each decision, each movement, each second could mean survival, or sudden death. And yet, despite the overwhelming danger, you had survived 19 days, an extraordinary testament to your awareness, cunning, and nerve. The 20th morning arrived with a sweltering sun that turned Tenochtitlan's stone streets into a glare-filled labyrinth. Each shadow seemed alive, each corner potentially hiding a jaguar warrior, a priest, or another source of sudden death. You moved cautiously, acutely aware that your presence as an outsider was more conspicuous than ever. Every step was deliberate, every glance measured, and every breath a potential signal to the city's deadly rhythm. By mid-morning, the market was a swirl of color and sound. Merchants shouted for attention, their wares, vivid textiles, woven baskets of maize, exotic feathers, arranged meticulously. Children darted carefully between adults, and families moved with the practiced caution of long experience. Yet beneath the bustle lay an almost imperceptible tension. The city itself seemed aware of you, its gaze constant and watchful. You felt eyes on you even where no one seemed to be looking, and every instinct screamed that the danger today would be more immediate than ever. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's gaze fell on your hiding place. Your chest tightened. You pressed flat against the wall, muscles coiled, heart pounding like a drum. One accidental flicker of movement could be your last. The warrior's eyes swept over you with meticulous scrutiny, lingering just long enough to make the second stretch unbearably. Slowly, deliberately, he turned and moved down the street, and you exhaled quietly, adrenaline still coursing through your body. Survival was not about bravery, it was about invisibility, timing, and the ability to read the city like a predator. By noon, the temple steps were alive with movement. Priests and novices prepared another ritual. A young boy was led forward, bound and trembling. The priest's movements were flawless, precise, and rehearsed. You crouched in the shadows, stomach twisting, every nerve on edge. Observation was your only defense. Every gesture, every rhythm, every subtle shift of attention was crucial. Misreading any of it could put you directly in the line of danger. The obsidian knife caught the sun and glinted sharply. The ritual began swiftly, brutally, with the young boy's life ending before he could resist. The crowd erupted into chants and prayers, celebrating the god's appeasement. You turned away, nausea threatening to overtake you. Running could draw attention, yet witnessing too closely could be just as deadly. Survival depended on vigilance, calculation, and complete invisibility. One mistake could erase you instantly. As afternoon pressed on, you moved cautiously along the canals. Merchants repositioned their stalls to avoid watchful eyes. Children moved with careful precision, weaving patterns designed to minimize exposure. Families performed deliberate routines, each gesture learned over generations to survive in a city where death could arrive without warning. You imitated their behaviors where possible, but the sense of imminent danger never left you. By late afternoon, the drums from the temple grew louder, signaling the approach of the evening ritual. Torches flickered along the streets, casting long, flickering shadows. You crouched in a narrow alley, muscles tense, senses sharpened. Tonight, the threat felt almost personal, as if the city itself were testing your ability to remain unseen. Every heartbeat, every movement, every breath was a trial. Night fell, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted but alert. The distant chants and lapping water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were merciless. Life was fragile, fleeting, and always measured against the altar, the knife, and the ritual. Each second, each movement, each decision could determine whether you survived, or died. Yet, somehow, you had survived 20 days, an incredible testament to your vigilance, cunning, and nerve. The 21st morning arrived with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down on Tenochtitlan from every angle. The sun's glare bounced off the stone streets and shimmering canals, turning the city into a maze of blinding light and shadow. Every corner, every alley, every shadow could hide a jaguar warrior, a priest, or the blade of an obsidian knife. You moved cautiously, heart hammering, muscles coiled, knowing that today, danger would feel impossibly close. By mid-morning, the marketplace buzzed with energy. Merchants shouted for attention, arranging baskets of maize, bright feathers, and vibrant textiles in precise, attention-grabbing patterns. Children ran carefully between adults, their movements learned to avoid predators, while families navigated the crowd with deliberate caution. Yet beneath the hustle, a tense, almost electric undercurrent pulsed. You felt it, a sensation that the city itself had taken notice of you, that the rhythm of Tenochtitlan now included your presence as a potential prey. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's eyes locked onto you. Panic surged through your body. You pressed yourself flat against the nearest wall, holding your breath, muscles taut. One inadvertent movement could end your life instantly. The warrior's gaze lingered, scanning, measuring, testing. Slowly, tortuously, he moved past, leaving you trembling, aware that even a fleeting glance could have been fatal. The city's lesson was clear: invisibility was survival. By noon, the temple steps were alive with preparation. Priests and novices arranged ceremonial garb, offerings, and instruments. A young woman, trembling and bound, was guided forward. The chanting of the priests filled the air in a low, hypnotic rhythm, weaving a tension that seemed to vibrate through the streets. You crouched in the shadows, stomach twisting with fear. Observation was your shield, any lapse could bring the deadly gaze of the priests down upon you. Every movement of the crowd, every subtle shift, was a signal you had to read correctly to survive. The obsidian knife flashed sharply in the sunlight. The ritual began, swift and merciless. The young woman's life ended in moments, replaced immediately by the crowd's cheers and chants. You turned away, nausea threatening, knowing that fleeing could be deadly, yet watching too closely could be just as lethal. Tenochtitlan demanded vigilance, patience, and complete invisibility. One mistake could mean sudden death. As afternoon stretched on, you moved along the canals, noting the subtle adjustments of the city's inhabitants. Merchants repositioned their stalls to avoid patrols. Children moved with careful attention to patterns, families performed rehearsed, deliberate gestures, and warriors shifted their stances as they passed. You copied these patterns, relying on learned observation to navigate safely. Yet the sense of being hunted never left you. The city's awareness of your presence pressed close, as if it wanted to test your survival skills more directly. By late afternoon, the temple drums began again, signaling the approach of the evening ritual. Torches flickered, casting twisting shadows that seemed to chase you down the streets. You crouched in a narrow alley, senses on high alert. The danger felt immediate and personal. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step was a test of your ability to remain unseen. Survival was a thread, thin and fraying, that you clung to with desperate care. Night fell, and you pressed yourself against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted yet hyper-aware. The distant chants, the drumming, the soft lap of water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were relentless. Life was fleeting, fragile, and constantly measured against the altar, the knife, and the ritual. Each movement, each second, each choice could mean the difference between survival and death. Yet despite the ever-present danger, you had survived 21 days, an extraordinary testament to your observation, cunning, and nerve. The 22nd morning arrived with a suffocating heat, the sun turning Tenochtitlan's stone streets into a glittering, almost blinding labyrinth. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting and hiding potential threats, warriors, priests, or the deadly obsidian knives that could end life in an instant. You moved cautiously, each step deliberate, each glance calculated. The city now felt like a living predator, aware of your presence, watching, testing. By mid-morning, the marketplace was bustling as usual, but you noticed the subtle shifts in the crowd. Merchants adjusted their stalls, arranging baskets of maize, feathers, and textiles to maintain visibility but avoid the scrutiny of patrolling warriors. Children ran between adults with careful precision, families moved with deliberate grace, and whispers traveled like currents beneath the cacophony. You had learned to read these hidden signals, misreading them could be fatal. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's eyes fixed on you. Panic surged. You pressed yourself flat against a wall, muscles tensed, heart hammering. One inadvertent movement could end your life instantly. The warrior's gaze swept slowly, deliberately, as if measuring every detail. Seconds stretched like hours, but eventually, he moved on. Relief washed over you, but the lingering awareness that you had been noted made your pulse quicken. The city's attention felt personal today, almost predatory. By noon, the temple steps were alive with preparation for the day's ritual. Priests and novices moved with mechanical precision, adjusting ceremonial garb and arranging offerings. A young boy, bound and trembling, was led to the top of the pyramid. The priests chanted in low, hypnotic tones, their voices weaving a tension that radiated through the plaza. You crouched in the shadows, stomach tight with nausea. Observation was survival. Every gesture, every rhythm, every subtle motion was a map for navigating the deadly choreography of Tenochtitlan. The obsidian knife caught the sunlight, flashing sharply. The ritual began swiftly, the boy's life ending in moments. The crowd erupted, praising the gods, oblivious to the terror it inspired. You turned away, knowing that fleeing could draw attention, but watching too closely could be equally lethal. Survival depended entirely on vigilance, on blending into the background, and on predicting the city's lethal rhythms. One misstep, one accidental glance, could erase you instantly. As afternoon wore on, you navigated the canals, noting the subtle adjustments of those around you. Merchants shifted their stalls, children moved with caution, and families performed rehearsed movements designed to avoid danger. You mimicked these patterns, knowing that every detail could protect you, or expose you. The city's presence pressed close, and the sense of being watched grew almost unbearable. By late afternoon, the distant drumming signaled the approach of the evening ritual. Torches flickered, stretching long, menacing shadows across the streets. You crouched in a narrow alley, every muscle taut, senses heightened. The threat felt immediate, almost personal. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step could determine whether you survived or became part of the altar. Night fell, and you pressed against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted but alert. The drums, chants, and soft lapping of water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were merciless. Life was fragile, fleeting, and measured against the knife, the altar, and the ritual. Each movement, each decision, each second was critical. And yet, despite the constant danger, you had survived 22 days, an extraordinary testament to your vigilance, cunning, and nerve. The 23rd morning arrived with a relentless sun that turned Tenochtitlan streets and canals into a glittering trap. Each shadow seemed alive, every corner could conceal a jaguar warrior or a priest ready to strike. You moved cautiously, heart pounding, muscles coiled like springs. The city now felt as if it were aware of your presence, testing you, challenging your ability to remain invisible. Every step, every glance, every breath was a calculated risk. By mid-morning, the marketplace was alive with activity. Merchants shouted for attention, arranging baskets of maize, bright textiles, and feathers to attract buyers. Children ran between adults, their movements deliberate, avoiding danger without being noticed. Families moved with precise, rehearsed caution. The energy of the crowd masked a tense undercurrent, a silent awareness that something was different today, that an outsider, someone not fully part of the rhythm, was navigating the city. You felt eyes on you, even when no one appeared to look. Suddenly, a jaguar warrior's gaze locked on you. Panic surged through your body. You pressed yourself flat against a wall, muscles tense, heart hammering. One wrong move, one accidental flicker of movement, could end your life instantly. The warrior's eyes scanned you deliberately, measuring, testing, analyzing every detail. Slowly, excruciatingly, he moved on. Relief surged through you, but the encounter left you hyper-aware. Today, danger felt almost personal, and Tenochtitlan seemed to have singled you out. By noon, the temple steps were alive with preparation for the ritual. Priests adjusted ceremonial garb, arranged offerings, and chanted softly. A young girl, trembling and bound, was led to the pyramid summit. The rhythm of the priest's chants filled the plaza, hypnotic and tense, radiating unease through the crowd. You crouched in the shadows, stomach twisting. Observation was survival, every movement, every subtle gesture, every rhythm of the crowd and priests was vital. Misreading any of it could be fatal. The obsidian knife flashed in the sunlight. The ritual began swiftly. The girl's struggle was brief, her life ended almost before she could resist. The crowd erupted in praise, chants echoing through the plaza. You turned away, nausea threatening, aware that fleeing could draw attention as easily as watching too closely. Survival required invisibility, patience, and constant calculation. One mistake could erase you instantly. As afternoon wore on, you navigated the narrow alleys along the canals. Merchants adjusted stalls, children moved with careful precision, and families performed deliberate, rehearsed gestures to avoid danger. You copied these patterns, knowing every detail mattered. The city's presence pressed close, almost suffocating, a constant reminder that you were an outsider and highly vulnerable. By late afternoon, the drumming from the temple grew louder, signaling the evening ritual. Torches flickered, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to follow your movements. You crouched in a narrow alley, senses heightened. The danger felt immediate, personal, and inescapable. Every heartbeat, every movement, every step could determine survival or death. Night fell, and you pressed against the cool stone by the canal, exhausted yet alert. The distant chants, drums, and soft lapping of water reminded you that Tenochtitlan's lessons were unrelenting. Life was fragile, fleeting, and measured against the altar, the knife, and the rituals. Each moment, each decision, each motion could mean survival, or sudden death. Yet, despite the constant, suffocating threat, you had survived 23 days, an incredible testament to your awareness, cunning, and nerve. You slipped silently through the twisting alleys of Tenochtitlan, feeling the oppressive weight of the city pressing in from all sides. Shadows clung to walls like predators, and every flicker of movement could conceal a jaguar warrior, a priest, or an unexpected civilian ready to draw attention to you. The air was thick with the mingled scents of cooking maize, incense, and the metallic tang of blood from the temples. You kept your body low, muscles coiled, senses straining to catch every sound, the distant chant of priests, the soft shuffle of sandals against stone, the whisper of the canal water. Ahead, you spotted a narrow passage leading between two market stalls. It offered temporary concealment, but it was risky. Merchants and their assistants were nearby, moving in unpredictable patterns. One misstep could draw their eyes toward you, and once noticed, there would be nowhere to hide. You paused, measuring the distance, timing the movement of the shadows, waiting for the moment when your passage would be least visible. Every instinct screamed caution. A sudden shout echoed from the temple plaza, distant yet sharp. Your pulse jumped. Priests were directing the crowd, perhaps for another ritual, perhaps for a procession. The noise masked some of your movement but also heightened tension. Every person in the streets had learned subtle cues to survive here, outsiders rarely lasted long. You pressed yourself flat against the wall, holding your breath as a pair of warriors passed, their painted bodies sleek and alert, eyes sweeping the marketplace. You felt the air tighten, a silent accusation aimed in your direction, yet somehow they moved past without noticing. You continued along the alley, ducking behind a stack of clay pots as a group of novices appeared, moving in precise steps, chanting softly. Their rhythm was mesmerizing, hypnotic even, but you forced your mind to focus. The city was a constant puzzle of sightlines, movements, and timing. One lapse, one hesitation, one misread signal, could be fatal. You reminded yourself that Tenochtitlan demanded complete vigilance. Life was never guaranteed here. The obsidian knives glinted in sunlight from a nearby ceremonial table. A young captive's struggles had just ended. You glimpsed the priest's hand as he lifted the knife for the ritual, the crowd erupting in fervent praise. The sound of chanting, the drumbeat, and the occasional shout blended into a tense symphony of fear and celebration. You turned away, stomach twisting, knowing that even observing carried risk. Each movement now had to be precise, each shadow could hide someone observing you as closely as you observed them. The streets became tighter, more convoluted, forcing you to weave through narrow passages and dark corners. The ambient sounds of the city, dripping water from the canals, distant chatter, the shuffle of sandals, formed a map in your mind. You had learned to predict patterns, anticipate the movements of guards, merchants, and novices alike. But the city had grown restless. Something about your presence seemed to stir it, as if it were testing how long an outsider could survive before being caught. Ahead, a torch flickered in the darkness, casting a long, dancing shadow across the wall. You pressed yourself into the shadow of a stall, barely daring to breathe. Every muscle tensed, every sense sharp. A group of warriors passed, their eyes sweeping systematically, tongues murmuring soft commands to one another. You held perfectly still, counting seconds in your head, willing the shadows to conceal you completely. Once they passed, you moved again, silently, swiftly, threading through the streets like a ghost. Night began to fall, and the city transformed. Torches illuminated ritual spaces, casting flickering, monstrous shadows on walls and alleyways. Drums echoed from the temples, steady, hypnotic, omnipresent. Every movement you made had to be synchronized with the rhythms of the city, blending into its chaotic order. The danger was immediate, constant, and intimate. One false step could be your last. And yet, somehow, you continued, threading your way through Tenochtitlan's maze, surviving in a world where death was never far, where every glance could end your life, and where the city itself seemed to watch, waiting for a single lapse to claim you. The narrow streets of Tenochtitlan twisted like a labyrinth, and every corner seemed alive with danger. Shadows clung to walls, moving as if sentient, and the faint echo of footsteps or whispered chants made your heart pound. You kept your body low, slipping silently between stalls and alleyways, eyes scanning constantly for the flash of jaguar-painted skin or the glint of an obsidian knife. The city had become a predator, and you, a fragile, exposed prey, could feel its attention tightening around you. Ahead, a group of merchants huddled over their baskets, unaware of your presence. Their movements were cautious, trained by years of living under the constant scrutiny of warriors and priests. You mimicked their careful patterns, ducking low, shifting slowly, timing your breaths with the rhythm of their steps. Each alley was a test, each shadow a potential death trap. You knew that one wrong motion could draw the gaze of a warrior who needed only a moment to end your life. Suddenly, a torchlight flickered across the wall behind you. You froze, muscles taut, heart racing. A warrior moved swiftly down the alley, eyes scanning every inch of the path. You pressed yourself flat against the rough stone, holding your breath as he passed mere inches from your hiding place. His presence was a silent reminder, the city never stopped watching, and survival depended on becoming part of its rhythm, invisible yet hyper-aware of every pulse of danger. You continued along a canal, the water glinting faintly in the torchlight. The soft lapping sounded deceptively calm against the backdrop of distant drumming and chanting. Priests moved with meticulous precision, preparing another ritual at the top of a nearby pyramid. You could see the gleam of obsidian knives, the ritual garb, the trembling captives, each element a stark reminder that life here was precarious and fleeting. Observation was your shield, understanding the city's deadly choreography was your only protection. The ritual began abruptly, swift and merciless. A young captive's struggles ended within moments, the crowd erupting in chants and fervent cries. You turned away, stomach twisting, as the air filled with the mix of incense, smoke, and metallic tang of blood. Even witnessing the ceremony from a distance carried risk. Every movement had to be precise, every step calculated to avoid detection. Tenochtitlan demanded constant vigilance, and even then, survival was never guaranteed. The streets narrowed further, forcing you into tight passages lined with stacked clay pots, woven baskets, and merchant stalls. Every step became a careful negotiation with the city's omnipresent watchfulness. Shadows moved with deceptive speed, and the flicker of torchlight created illusions of figures that were not there, yet you couldn't afford to take chances. Every sound, every reflection, every twitch of movement demanded your full attention. Night deepened, and the city transformed. Drums echoed like distant thunder, shadows danced like living things, and the flickering torches illuminated the ritual spaces in harsh, stuttering light. Every movement now required perfect synchronization with the rhythms of the city. The danger pressed closer, tangible, almost personal. You felt it in the tightening of your chest, in the tremor of your hands, in the racing of your heart. The city itself seemed to hunt you, waiting for a single misstep to end your life. And yet, despite the suffocating fear and omnipresent threat, you moved. Step by careful step, breath by measured breath, you continued to thread your way through Tenochtitlan's perilous streets. Every shadow, every alley, every flickering torch reminded you that survival here was not chance, it was vigilance, cunning, and nerve honed to razor sharpness. Death could strike at any moment, but somehow, against all odds, you remained unseen, weaving through the city's deadly rhythm like a ghost. The city's maze of alleys twisted unpredictably, each turn revealing a new threat. Tenochtitlan had a way of making every shadow seem alive, every flicker of movement potentially deadly. You moved silently, pressed against walls, slipping between narrow gaps, listening to the subtle shifts in the city, the soft shuffle of sandals, the faint whisper of chanting, the distant echo of drums. Each sound was a potential warning, and each misstep could draw the attention of jaguar warriors or priests wielding obsidian knives. Ahead, a narrow passage offered temporary concealment. Merchants were arranging baskets of maize and colorful feathers, their movements careful and precise, dictated by years of living under constant threat. You mimicked their gestures, ducking low, timing each step to match the rhythm of their motions. Every alley was a puzzle, every shadow a riddle. You had to move like a shadow yourself, invisible yet acutely aware of every detail. A sudden shout from the temple plaza pierced the air. The crowd's attention shifted, and you felt the city's pulse tighten around you. Priests were guiding another ritual, and the gleam of ceremonial knives caught in the sun. You pressed yourself flat against the wall, muscles tense, heart hammering, as a jaguar warrior passed close by, scanning for threats. One flicker of movement, one misread glance, could have ended your life. But somehow, he moved past, and you exhaled silently, adrenaline still coursing. The temple steps were alive with activity. Priests chanted in hypnotic rhythms, adjusting ceremonial garb and arranging offerings. A young captive, trembling, was guided toward the altar. The obsidian knife flashed in the sunlight as the ritual began, swift and merciless. The captive's life ended in moments, replaced immediately by the crowd's chants. You turned away, stomach twisting, knowing that fleeing could attract attention, yet watching too closely was equally dangerous. Survival here depended on perfect invisibility and relentless vigilance. The streets narrowed further, forcing you into tight passages and hidden corners. Merchants and citizens moved with precise patterns, and you mirrored them where possible, knowing that one false motion could be fatal. Every shadow, every flicker of torchlight, every sound became part of the deadly rhythm you had to navigate. Tenochtitlan was no longer just a city, it was a predator, and you had become its careful, wary prey. Night deepened, and the flickering torches cast shadows that seemed alive. Drums echoed from the temples, the rhythm hypnotic, relentless. Each alleyway, each canal, each narrow passage became a gauntlet of potential death. You moved in perfect synchronization with the city, timing your steps with the crowd, blending into its deadly choreography. The sense of being watched, pursued, tested was almost suffocating. Despite the suffocating tension, you pressed on. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you threaded your way through the labyrinthine streets. Every shadow, every alley, every flicker of torchlight reminded you that survival in Tenochtitlan was not a matter of chance. It was observation, cunning, and nerve honed to perfection. Death could strike at any moment, but somehow, you remained unseen, slipping like a ghost through a city that seemed to breathe menace in every stone. The city had become a labyrinth of danger, every alley a potential trap, every shadow a threat. Tenochtitlan pulsed around you, alive with the rhythm of rituals, the shuffle of feet, and the low hum of chants. You moved carefully, pressed against walls, slipping between narrow gaps, listening to the subtle cues of the city. Each sound, the distant beat of drums, the soft footfalls of merchants, the hushed whispers of novices, was a signal. Misreading any of it could be fatal. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught your eye, a priest moving with the deliberate precision of someone trained to notice every anomaly. You froze, pressed against a wall, blending with the shadows. His gaze swept past, seemingly sensing the city more than the people in it, and then he moved on. You exhaled silently, muscles tense, knowing that the city had tested your presence and allowed you to survive another moment. The streets narrowed, forcing you into tight passages between market stalls and storage buildings. Merchants moved with cautious precision, stacking baskets of maize and vibrant feathers to maximize visibility while avoiding the watchful eyes of passing warriors. You mirrored their motions, timing your steps to the rhythm of their gestures. Every movement, every breath, every glance had to be perfect. A single misstep could draw the attention of a warrior who would not hesitate to kill. From the temple plaza came a sudden shout, the ceremonial drumbeats growing louder. Another ritual was unfolding. You pressed yourself into a shadowed corner, stomach twisting with dread. A young captive was led forward, trembling and terrified, the priest's chants weaving tension through the crowd. The obsidian knife flashed in the sunlight, and life was extinguished in moments. The crowd erupted in celebration, their voices rising in fervent chants. You turned away, feeling the metallic scent of blood in the air, and reminded yourself that even observing carried risk. As night approached, the city transformed. Torches flickered, casting long, monstrous shadows along the walls, and the streets seemed to close in around you. Every alleyway became a gauntlet. The distant drums set a hypnotic rhythm, a pulse that mirrored your own racing heartbeat. You moved in careful synchronization, timing each step with the city's rhythm, slipping through narrow passages, ducking behind stalls, merging into the shadows. The sense of being watched intensified. Every shadow seemed to shift, every footstep echoed too close behind you. You realized that the city itself was testing you, probing your movements, daring you to make a mistake. Each canal, each twisting street, each torchlit corner was a potential death trap. Yet somehow, you continued. Every breath, every step, every movement was calculated, precise, and silent. You pressed forward, navigating the city with the skill of someone who had become part of its rhythm. The danger was omnipresent, immediate, and intimate. Every flicker of torchlight, every shuffle of a foot, every whisper of movement could signal death. And yet, despite the suffocating pressure, the ever-present threat of ritual sacrifice, and the lethal precision of the city's warriors and priests, you survived. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you continued through the night, a ghost threading your way through Tenochtitlan's deadly heartbeat. The city's alleys twisted in impossible patterns, each turn revealing new threats. Torches flickered along the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, echoing the rhythm of drums from distant temples. Every step you took had to be deliberate, every motion, silent. The slightest miscalculation could draw the attention of jaguar warriors or priests, and in Tenochtitlan, a moment's lapse often meant death. You moved along a narrow canal, water reflecting the flickering torchlight in chaotic patterns. The city pulsed with life and danger. Merchants rearranged their stalls, adjusting baskets of maize, feathers, and textiles to keep themselves safe from scrutiny. Children weaved carefully between them, taught from birth to avoid the deadly gaze of warriors and priests. Families performed precise gestures, their bodies moving like instruments in a deadly symphony. You mirrored them as best you could, knowing that even a slight deviation could be fatal. A sudden shout echoed from the temple plaza. Priests had begun another ritual. You pressed yourself against a wall, stomach tight, heart hammering. The obsidian knife glinted in the sunlight as a captive, trembling, was led forward. The chanting of the priests was hypnotic, each word a rhythm that seemed to synchronize the city's heartbeat. You watched, stomach twisting, as life was extinguished almost before the captive could resist. The crowd erupted, voices rising in praise, and the metallic scent of blood mingled with the scent of incense and cooking maize. Even observing carried risk. The streets narrowed further, forcing you into tight passages where movement had to be perfectly calculated. Shadows clung to every surface, and every flicker of torchlight could reveal your presence. You moved in the rhythm of the city, timing each step to avoid detection, blending into the patterns of merchants, families, and children. The sense of being watched pressed in from all directions. It was as though the city itself were alive, testing your every motion. Drums echoed from the temples, their rhythm hypnotic, insistent. You pressed yourself against the wall of a narrow alley, every muscle coiled, senses sharpened. The city's danger felt immediate, almost personal. Every glance, every movement, every breath was a test of your awareness and nerve. One misstep, and the city could claim you just as easily as the priests with their knives. As night deepened, the torchlight stretched shadows into grotesque shapes. You wove through alleys, slipped between stalls, and followed canals, each movement measured, precise. The danger pressed closer with every step. You realized that nowhere in Tenochtitlan was truly safe. Every corner, every street, every open space could hide death. And yet, despite the suffocating presence of lethal eyes, of rituals, and of the city itself watching your every motion, you continued to survive, moving like a ghost through its deadly rhythm. Every step was a silent negotiation with the city. Every breath had to be synchronized with the distant drums. The risk was constant, relentless, almost unbearable, yet you pressed on, threading your way through Tenochtitlan's dangerous heartbeat. The alleys, canals, and temple plazas all combined into a living gauntlet, and you navigated it with careful calculation, invisibility, and nerve. Death could strike at any moment, but somehow, you remained unseen, threading through the city as a shadow within shadows. The streets of Tenochtitlan had become a living maze of threat. Shadows clung to every corner, twisting with the flickering torchlight, and the distant drumming of the temples felt like a heartbeat in your chest. Every footstep you took had to be precise, silent, and deliberate. One misstep, a stumble, a cough, a glance in the wrong direction, could bring the gaze of a jaguar warrior or a priest and end your life instantly. The city seemed alive, testing your presence, daring you to survive another moment. You navigated narrow alleys, pressed against stone walls, slipping past merchants arranging baskets of maize, feathers, and textiles. Their movements were careful and deliberate, honed by years of navigating the deadly rhythms of the city. Children darted between them, small shadows in a world built for survival. You imitated their motions, weaving carefully through the crowd, blending in, timing your steps to match the cadence of the city around you. Every sound, shuffling feet, soft whispers, distant chants, became part of your map, guiding your movements, warning of unseen danger. A sudden shout cut through the market noise. Priests had begun another ritual, their chants rising above the din. You froze, pressed into a shadowed corner, heart hammering, stomach tight. On the temple steps, a young captive, trembling with fear, was led forward. The obsidian knife glinted in the sun as the ritual began. Life was extinguished almost instantly, replaced by the crowd's fervent cries of praise. You exhaled quietly, nausea rising, aware that even being nearby could attract fatal attention. The city demanded invisibility, vigilance, and nerve honed to perfection. The alleys tightened further, forcing you to maneuver through constricted passages lined with market stalls and stacked clay pots. Every shadow could conceal a predator. Every flicker of torchlight could reveal your presence. You moved in perfect synchronization with the patterns of those around you, mimicking the careful gestures of merchants and children. Each step, each breath, was a negotiation with death. Tenochtitlan tested your awareness, measuring your reactions, daring you to falter. Drums echoed through the city, a relentless rhythm that seemed to synchronize with your heartbeat. You pressed into the darkness, muscles coiled, senses acute. Every movement, every glance, every sound could determine life or death. The city's watchfulness was palpable. It stalked you in a way that no single warrior could. Every canal, every passageway, every street felt like a gauntlet, and one false move could end your life instantly. Night deepened, and torchlight created monstrous shadows that twisted and writhed along walls. You moved with calculated care, slipping between alleys, pressing against walls, blending with darkness. The rituals, the priests, the warriors, they were constant reminders that the city was alive with lethal intent. Yet, despite the suffocating danger, the omnipresent threat of the altar and knife, and the suffocating awareness of being hunted, you survived. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you navigated Tenochtitlan like a ghost, threading through its deadly heartbeat, constantly aware that death was never far behind. The city seemed to tighten around you like a living trap. Every alley, every passage, every flickering torch cast long, threatening shadows that danced like predators. The rhythm of drums from the temples felt inside your chest, each beat a reminder that danger was immediate, constant, and inescapable. You moved cautiously, pressed against walls, muscles coiled, senses stretched to their absolute limit. One wrong move, a stumble, a cough, a glance, could bring the gaze of a jaguar warrior, a priest, or any number of unseen threats. The streets twisted in impossible patterns, every turn revealing new hazards. Merchants carefully adjusted their stalls, stacking maize and colorful feathers to avoid the attention of patrolling warriors, their movements precise and rehearsed. Children darted with trained caution, weaving between adults, their small bodies teaching you lessons in survival without words. You mirrored their motions, timing your steps with theirs, blending into the deadly choreography of the city. Every movement had to be perfect, hesitation or error could be fatal. A sudden shout from the temple plaza sent a ripple through the crowd. Priests began a new ritual, their chants rising in hypnotic cadence. You froze, pressed flat against a wall, stomach twisting, heart hammering. On the temple steps, a young captive trembled, bound and terrified. The obsidian knife flashed in the sunlight as the ritual began, swift and merciless. Life was extinguished almost instantly, replaced by the crowd's fervent cries of praise. Even at a distance, the metallic scent of blood and smoke pressed against your senses. Observation itself was dangerous, being too close could draw fatal attention. The streets narrowed further, forcing you through tight, labyrinthine passages. Shadows clung to every surface, and flickering torchlight created illusions that might hide a predator, or betray your presence. You moved in perfect synchronization with the people around you, mirroring the cautious gestures of merchants and children alike. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a careful negotiation with death. The city seemed to breathe with lethal intent, testing your awareness at every turn. The distant drums grew louder, their rhythm insistent, hypnotic. You pressed yourself into the darkness of a narrow alley, muscles coiled, senses sharpened. Every glance, every movement, every sound could determine survival or instant death. The city's vigilance was omnipresent, almost conscious. Every canal, every street, every passageway was a gauntlet, and one slip could erase you from existence. Night descended fully, torchlight painting monstrous shadows along the walls. The rituals continued, the chants echoed, the drums never ceased. You moved with painstaking precision, slipping between alleys, pressing against walls, threading through the city like a ghost. The danger pressed closer, immediate and personal, as if the city itself were hunting you. Despite the suffocating fear, the relentless threat of ritual sacrifice, and the omnipresent vigilance of warriors and priests, you survived. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you navigated Tenochtitlan's deadly rhythm, aware that death could strike at any instant, but still moving, still unseen, still alive. The night air pressed down heavily, carrying the mingled scents of incense, cooking maize, and the metallic tang of blood from the temples. Every street, every alleyway, every canal reflected the flickering torchlight in unpredictable patterns, creating shadows that seemed alive. The drums from the temples reverberated in your chest, a constant, hypnotic reminder of the rituals unfolding around you. Danger was immediate, omnipresent, and intimate, and you moved with the caution of someone fully aware that one wrong step could be your last. You pressed yourself into the corner of a narrow alley, flattened against the rough stone wall, and watched the crowd as carefully as a predator watches prey. Merchants moved their wares, maize, vibrant feathers, colorful textiles, with careful precision, their motions learned from years of surviving under constant scrutiny. Children darted between them, small shadows navigating deadly currents. You mirrored their movements, timing your steps with theirs, blending into the deadly rhythm of Tenochtitlan. One small miscalculation, and you could be seen. One glance too long, one flicker of movement, and the city could claim you. From the temple plaza came a sudden shout, the sharp rhythm of drums cutting through the night air. Priests guided another captive to the top of the pyramid. The obsidian knife glinted in the torchlight, and a young boy trembled, bound and terrified, as the ritual began. The chants rose, echoing off the stone buildings, hypnotic and terrifying. Life was extinguished in moments, replaced immediately by the crowd's ecstatic cries. You pressed your hands over your mouth, stomach twisting, as the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Even from a distance, the rituals were a deadly warning. Survival demanded invisibility, vigilance, and nerve honed to perfection. The alleys narrowed, forcing you to move with extreme caution. Every shadow could conceal a jaguar warrior, a priest, or an observant citizen. Every flicker of torchlight could betray your presence. You moved in perfect synchronization with the city's patterns, mirroring the subtle gestures of merchants and children alike. Each step was a careful negotiation with death. The city itself seemed aware of you now, testing your reactions, daring you to make a mistake. Drums echoed incessantly, their rhythm like a pulse in your own chest. You pressed yourself into darkness, senses sharp, every nerve straining. The danger felt personal, immediate, inescapable. Every movement, every breath, every glance could mean the difference between life and sudden death. The city, alive with ritual energy and the vigilance of its warriors, pressed around you like a living trap. Night deepened, and the torchlight threw monstrous, twisting shadows across the stone walls. Rituals continued, the chants rose, and the drums never ceased. You threaded carefully through alleys and passages, pressing against walls, blending with shadows, moving like a ghost. The presence of the rituals, the priests, and the warriors made the city itself seem like a predator stalking you. And yet, despite the suffocating danger, the omnipresent threat of the altar and the knife, and the relentless vigilance surrounding you, you survived. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you moved through Tenochtitlan, a shadow within shadows, acutely aware that death could strike at any instant, but still alive. The air grew thick with incense, smoke, and the unmistakable metallic scent of blood. Tenochtitlan street seemed to pulse with life and danger, every shadow hiding the potential for sudden death. You moved cautiously, pressing yourself close to walls, slipping between narrow gaps, fully aware that one misstep could reveal you to jaguar warriors or priests wielding obsidian knives. The drums from the temple echoed like a heartbeat in your chest, a rhythm that synchronized with your own, reminding you that time, movement, and silence were now your only allies. Ahead, the plaza opened up, revealing a scene both mesmerizing and terrifying. The temple steps were alive with ritual activity. Priests in elaborate garb moved with mechanical precision, guiding bound captives, adjusting ceremonial knives, and chanting in low, hypnotic tones. The crowd pressed around the plaza, their eyes reflecting fascination, fear, and reverence. You crouched in the shadows of a nearby alley, stomach tight, heart hammering. Observation was survival, but even watching carried risk. One accidental glance, one misjudged movement, could draw attention and make you the next target. A young girl was led to the top of the pyramid, trembling with fear. The obsidian knife caught the flickering torchlight, flashing briefly, a promise of swift death. The priest raised it high, chanting, and the ritual began. Life was extinguished almost instantly, the crowd erupting in ecstatic cries. You turned your head slightly, catching only glimpses of the ceremony, forcing yourself to remain hidden. Your stomach churned with nausea, your pulse racing. Survival here required invisibility, perfect timing, and nerves hardened to steel. The alleys leading away from the plaza were even narrower, forcing you to move with painstaking care. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting and stretching with every flicker of torchlight. Merchants adjusted their wares, children moved with rehearsed precision, and every passerby seemed to follow a pattern of survival you had learned to read and mirror. You moved like a shadow within shadows, each step synchronized with the rhythm of the city, aware that the very ground beneath your feet was watched, measured, and potentially lethal. The drums from the temple continued relentlessly, a hypnotic, pulsating presence. You pressed yourself against a wall, muscles coiled, senses stretched to their limit. The danger felt immediate and personal. Every glance, every movement, every breath could determine life or death. The city's vigilance seemed almost conscious, testing your reactions, daring you to make a mistake. Every canal, every street, every alley became a potential gauntlet, and one slip could erase you instantly. Night deepened fully, and the torchlight cast monstrous, shifting shadows across the streets. You threaded through the alleys, slipped past stalls, and navigated the canals, moving with perfect caution. The rituals, the priests, and the ever-present warriors made the city feel alive with lethal intent. Yet, despite the suffocating danger and constant threat of death, you survived. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you moved through Tenochtitlan's deadly heartbeat, a shadow among shadows, acutely aware that death could strike at any instant, but still moving, still unseen, still alive. The night had stretched into a tense eternity, each alley, each torchlit corner, each shadowed passage a potential death trap. The city's pulse, the drums, the chants, the distant cries of ritual, was omnipresent, vibrating through your body, through the stone streets, through the air itself. Tenochtitlan had tested you relentlessly, pressing close, challenging every movement, measuring your nerve and attention with merciless precision. And yet, somehow, against impossible odds, you were still alive. You slipped through the narrowest alleyways, pressed against walls, blending with shadows, heart hammering. Each step was a negotiation with death, each breath synchronized with the rhythm of the city. The distant torches illuminated fleeting glimpses of priests and jaguar warriors, each figure a reminder of how close your survival hung by a thread. Every canal reflected torchlight in fractured patterns, casting illusions that could betray you, or conceal you. You moved with perfect caution, every sense stretched to its absolute limit, knowing that even a single misstep could erase you in an instant. Ahead, the main plaza opened slightly, and you glimpsed the temple in full ceremonial glory. A final ritual was underway. Captives, trembling and terrified, were guided with precise motions to the top of the pyramid. Obsidian knives flashed, sunlight glinting briefly on their deadly edges. Priests chanted, low and hypnotic, commanding attention and obedience. The crowd's cries were frenzied, a mixture of fear and ecstatic praise. You held yourself low in the shadows, heart racing, stomach twisting, knowing that even mere observation could be dangerous. Then, amid the chaos, you noticed a rare opening, a narrow canal that led to the outskirts of the plaza. No priests or warriors were near. The rhythm of the drums and the crowd masked your movement perfectly. Step by careful step, breath by controlled breath, you moved, slipping silently along the water's edge. The city seemed to watch you, testing whether your nerve would falter. You kept moving, matching your movements to the patterns of shadows, the rhythm of the drums, the flow of people around you. As you reached the edge of the plaza, the open space allowed a fleeting moment of relief. The city's deadly gaze still lingered, the rituals continued, but you had found a fragile corridor, a temporary haven. The torchlight danced across the water, flickering reflections that both concealed and guided you. Every nerve screamed alertness, yet for the first time in hours, or perhaps days, you felt the slightest possibility of survival, a tiny thread of hope that you could slip from the city's deadly heartbeat. You moved along the canal, finally reaching the outer edges of the temple district. The sounds of drums, chants, and ceremonial cries faded slightly, though the city itself remained alive, vigilant, and threatening. You paused, pressed against a wall, muscles trembling from tension, senses still stretched to the limit. And in that rare moment, you realized something profound: you had survived where most would not have even lasted a single day. You had navigated the labyrinth of alleys, rituals, priests, and warriors. You had mirrored their rhythms, blended with the shadows, and lived. The night deepened into quiet, the torchlight flickered, and the city's pulse slowed slightly at the outskirts. You were alive, a fragile, trembling survivor in a world built to kill indiscriminately. Tenochtitlan, with its rituals, its obsidian knives, its vigilant priests and jaguar warriors, had tested every fiber of your being. And yet, against every expectation, against every lethal rhythm and pattern, you had endured. For now, at least, you had found a moment of safety, a fragile, fleeting victory in a city where survival was never guaranteed, and death lurked behind every shadow. The knowledge sank in slowly, you had survived the unthinkable. Tenochtitlan's deadly heartbeat continued around you, relentless and unyielding, yet you were still alive. A ghost threading through the city's peril, unseen, unnoticed, and improbably, still breathing.